Thank you very much, everyone. I feel I'm at home in Oliphant. My family settled here after they were thrown out of the Mahanoy Plain. They moved to Oliphant and became, citizens of this borough. My great-great-grandfather was John Kilcullen. He was a mayor of Oliphant. I was raised, though, in Blakely. Spent weekends on West Line Street in Oliphant, so I feel I am home. But also in my capacity, as Mary Kay said, as the president of the local historical society, also the chairman of the board of the Lackawanna Heritage Valley Authority. And during, not my chairmanship, but many years ago when this building was put together, we fostered this project on, but instead of ripping down Oliphant High School, to save Oliphant High School and convert it into apartments. So thank God that did happen, or we wouldn't be here today. But back in 1969, as a boy growing up in Blakely Borough, I belonged to a 4-H group. And you think, what happens even in a 4-H group in Blakely? You think that's for farm kids. Well, it is. But Cooperative Extension from Penn State had a program in the local, where your new building is in Peckville, in the basement there. Met once a week. I was in 4-H for 2 years. I did plant projects because I was very interested in plants. And lo and behold, I was selected to go to a retreat at Menominee Inn and Country Club in 1969 for 4-H. And that's when I first gathered and really learned about resorts. It was my first time to stay at one of these old Victorian resorts. And as a kid, excuse me, I fell in love with it. And when, lo and behold, my career and my education was, I went to a school where I got a degree in hotel restaurant management, worked for a major hotel corporation for a scat of years, my first career. And as I traveled the East Coast, I would, fish out these old resorts, which I did. So, also a collector of postcards. It's one of the things I collected, the old resorts of the Poconos. I'll tell you one story. Before I went to college, the summer before I went to college, my grandfather got me a job at the High Point Inn. Do you remember the High Point Inn? I lasted 2 days there. I went with $20 in my pocket if I needed money, and they thought that, the $20 would sustain me for my summer working at the High Point Inn. I think after the first 3 hours I was there, I was fleeced that by the older people that worked there, kids. I never gambled before, and I learned very quickly not to gamble again. So the 20 was gone in no time. As I said, I lasted 2 days. I called my grandparents to come up and get me because this was not for me. And I have vivid memories of working there, and also some of the characters that I worked with. But in collecting my postcards, it's one of the areas I did collect the resorts of the Poconos, and I have some cards that go back to the 1880s, late 1880s, and I brought some tonight so we could view. But my book that I wrote last year was called Journey Along the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad, because without the railroad, there wouldn't be the Poconos as we know it as today. In 1856, the Southern Division of the DL&W Railroad opened from Scranton to Slateford Junction. And then from there, it crossed the Delaware River, connected with the Morris and Erie Railroad, and on into Hoboken, where probably a good majority of you people have ridden on that same line. But that did give an opening to an area that was really wilderness. In the 1850s, the only people that were going up into the Poconos, because it was rocky, hilly land, it wasn't good for farming. There wasn't, nothing to sustain people with. We first saw fishermen coming up there, and then hunters. They'd go back and tell one person, that one person, they say one person will tell 10. Well, it got to be a very popular spot, not only for fishing, but hunting. So we see more people coming. And then, know the story about Jay Gould. There were hemlock trees up there, and hemlock is good for tanning leather. Well, he opened some tanneries up there, so you had some business. You had the lumbering business, and you have to remember too, we live in a very beautiful area today, but when you go out this door and look to your left or right, that was all clear cut at one time. There was no vegetation, over maybe a couple feet high, because they used all that wood for timbering for the mines. They did that also in the Poconos, not only for the mines, but for lumber that they would send to the eastern markets, Philadelphia, New York. So with that, with more people coming, little homes that they established, all of a sudden turned into boarding homes. We're going to see some boarding homes tonight. From boarding homes, small inns grew up, from small inns, hotels, and then we see from the hotels we have the religious organizations, especially the Friends from Philadelphia came up and built not only Buck Hill Falls, but also Pocono Manor. Then we see the Lutherans coming to the Pocono Pines and in building Lutherland. Yes, Joe?
Can I stop you for a minute?
Yes.
Our refreshment committee is reminding me that we have hot pizza and cold.
Hey, thank you, and thank you very much, everyone. I feel I'm at home in Oliphant. My family settled here after they were thrown out of the Mahanoy Plain. They moved to Oliphant and became, citizens of this borough. My great-great-grandfather was John Kilcullen. He was a mayor of Oliphant. I was raised, though, in Blakely, spent weekends on West Line Street in Oliphant, so I feel I am home. But also in my capacity, as Mary Kay said, as the president of the local historical society, also the chairman of the board of the Lackawanna Heritage Valley Authority. And during, not my chairmanship, but many years ago, when this building was put together, we fostered this project on, but instead of ripping down Oliphant High School, to save Oliphant High School and convert it into apartments. So thank God that did happen. We wouldn't be here today. But back in 1869, as a boy growing up in Blakely Borough, I belonged to a 4-H group. And you think, what happens even in a 4-H group in Blakely? You think that's for farm kids. Well, it is. But Cooperative Extension from Penn State had a program in the local, where your new building is, in fact, in the basement there. Met once a week. I was in 4-H for 2 years. I did plant projects because I was very interested in plants. And lo and behold, I was selected to go to a retreat at Menominee Inn and Country Club in 1969 for 4-H. And that's when I first gathered and really learned about resorts. It was my first time to stay at one of these old Victorian resorts. And as a kid, excuse me, I fell in love with it. And when, lo and behold, my career and my education was, I went to a school where I got a degree in hotel restaurant management, worked for a major hotel corporation for a scat of years, my first career. And as I traveled the East Coast, I would, fish out these old resorts, which I did. So, also a collector of postcards. It's one of the things I collected, the old resorts of the Poconos. I'll tell you one story. Before I went to college, the summer before I went to college, my grandfather got me a job at the High Point Inn. Do you remember the High Point Inn? I lasted 2 days there. I went with $20 in my pocket if I needed money, and they thought that, the $20 would sustain me for my summer working at the High Point Inn. I think after the first 3 hours I was there, I was fleeced that by the older people that worked there, kids. I never gambled before, and I learned very quickly not to gamble again. Because the 20 was gone in no time. As I said, I lasted 2 days. I called my grandparents to come up and get me because this was not for me. And I have vivid memories of working there, and also some of the characters that I worked with. But in collecting my postcards, it's one of the areas I did collect the resorts of the Poconos, and I have some cards that go back to the 1880s, late 1880s, and I brought some tonight so we could view. But my book that I wrote last year was called Journey Along the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad, because without the railroad, there wouldn't be the Poconos as we know it as today. In 1856, the Southern Division of the DL&W Railroad opened from Scranton to Slateford Junction. And then from there, it crossed the Delaware River, connected with the Morris and Erie Railroad, and on into Hoboken, where probably a good majority of you people have ridden on that same line. But that did give an opening to an area that was really wilderness. You know, in the 1850s, the only people that were going up into the Poconos, because it was rocky, hilly land, it wasn't good for farming. There wasn't, you know, nothing to sustain people with. We first saw fishermen coming up there, and then hunters. They'd go back and tell one person, that one person, you know, they say one person will tell 10. Well, it got to be a very popular spot, not only for fishing, but hunting. So we see more people coming. And then, you all know the story about Jay Gould. There were hemlock trees up there, and hemlock is good for, you know, tanning leather. Well, he opened some tanneries up there. So you had some business. You had the lumbering business, and you have to remember too, you know, we live in a very beautiful area today, but when you go out this door and look to your left or right, that was all clear cut at one time. There was no vegetation, you know, over maybe a couple feet high, because they used all that wood for timbering for the mines. They did that also in the Poconos, not only for the mines, but for lumber that they would send to the eastern markets, Philadelphia and New York. So with that, with more people coming, little homes that they established, all of a sudden turned into boarding homes. We're going to see some boarding homes tonight. From boarding homes, small inns grew up, from small inns, hotels, and then we see from the hotels we have the religious organizations, especially the Friends from Philadelphia came up and built not only Buck Hill Falls, but also Pocono Manor. Then we see the Lutherans coming to the Pocono Pines and in building Lutherland. And, yes, Joe?
Can I stop you?
Yeah, I'm okay. Yeah, pizza was good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'll give you the bill later.
We saw these religious groups come up and build these gigantic resorts. It surprised me today not one of them is left. The only large resort that's left that really, and it isn't that old, is Sky Top. Started to be built in 1920. But your Lutherland is gone. Your Buck Hill, it's a mere shell of the building. I just heard a couple of weeks ago that 5 people that belong to the Buck Hill Association that have cottages on the property have bought the place and they're going to turn it into condominiums. It's a great mission-style building. And then the only other one that's remaining is Pocono Manor, and they just went through that battle with, I guess, you know, the Mount Airy people regarding to get, you know, a gambling license. The DL&W Railroad brought people from New York City, northern New Jersey, across northern New Jersey. Delaware Water Gap was the first big resort. As Delaware Water Gap got crowded, they moved up the railroad line. Next town, East Stroudsburg. From East Stroudsburg, you had the Delaware Valley Railroad. That was only 30 miles long. It went from East Stroudsburg, followed the river up to Bushkill, and then came back down to East Stroudsburg. And along that particular small little railroad, there were all resorts. The resorts that are still there, Shawnee and the Delaware, that we probably all have been to, or at least heard about it, when Fred Waring you know, owned it for a great number of years. And then from there, you had Antelomic, Henryville, Cresco, Mount Pocono, Pocono Summit, and then at the top of the plateau, the Pocono Plateau, you had Tobyhanna. And really that's where the boarding houses, hotels, and inns ended, because Gouldsboro was more noted for their ice taking. It was on the downslide closer to Scranton. So we see the resorts ending at Tobyhanna, so that's what I based my book on. I follow the natural progression of the DL&W. So when you go through the book, you know, you could go to Cresco, and it gives pictures of practically all the old inns, resorts, boarding houses and hotels. So let's see some slides, and I'll try to make this as painless as possible. Map of Monroe County, just to point out, right down here, Delaware Water Gap, Railroad East Strasburg. It doesn't show, but your Delaware Valley Railroad would continue up that way, up the Delaware, and then all the way up to Tobyhanna, really the last in Monroe County. This map is from 1857. The Lackawanna Railroad in 1888 tried to promote the resorts. This is one of the saying, "Send me back to the mountains, for 'tis there I'd like to be, where the summer life is lazy and so careless and so free, where the wind is in the pine trees, whispering soft and whispering low. Come ye back, ye weary immortal, come ye back to Pocono." Outings on the Lackawanna, where I took this from, was their like promotional piece. You could go to the station and pick this up, and it would give not only a listing of all the resorts along the DLNW, but also the connecting lines, like the D&H going up to Richfield Springs, Cooperstown, so on and so forth, and then onto the Adirondacks. This is an old rack card. This would give you the times you could take the ferry from Manhattan at the Barclay Street Station, cross the river to Hoboken. From Hoboken, you climbed on the DLNW, and you were on your way to the Pocono Mountains. It's a quick map of the Lackawanna Railroad, DLNW, as it was called. And it shows that heavy black strip from Hoboken to onto Buffalo. And that spur on the left-hand side goes down to Bloomsburg, but it lists all the stops in between there. First postcard, hand-colored in Germany. This shows on the left-hand side Mount Tammany on the Jersey side, or Mount Mincy on the Jersey side left, the Kidney on the right-hand side. And you can go up there today and still see this in the summer when the water is high, with the exception of the rowboats with people in white dresses. You see a lot of kayakers and canoeists. Give you another example. This is the road going from Delaware Water Gap to Portland that follows the DLNW, and just shows you as it's going through the gap alongside the river. First station, as you cross the bridge at Slateford Junction, and you're coming into Delaware Water Gap. This photo shows the second railroad station of the DLNW. The first one burnt down. This station is still there in deplorable condition, but across the street you see that big Victorian edifice done in the Italianate architecture on the right. And then next to it would be their dining room, and that longer building with the 4 dormers, that was a bowling alley for guests. This is not one of the longest platforms in the Poconos, because when the trains came in, all the different hotels, and there were 35 either hotels or boarding houses in Delaware Water Gap at one time. The buckboards, or we call them omnibuses, horse-drawn, would pick up the guests and ferry them to their lodgings, and then the luggage would come on a bigger wagon. Another postcard, hand-colored in Germany, showing you of the Delaware House from the previous picture. It was up to the photographer when he sent the print to Germany to hand-color to tell them the colors to use. This is very muted. As you can tell, it must have had a clay-type roof on the bowling alley at least. But you see some of the horse and buggies that were used to ferry people from the station area here up to the hotels. Now, this is, when you go through the turnstiles at the bridge, that's all, it's no longer there, it's all covered, it's filled. The Glenwood Hotel started as a boys' school in Delaware Water Gap, converted it into 200 capacity occupancy for guests. This is the last remaining old resort in the Poconos, or this section of the Poconos, the Delaware Water Gap. It's still there. It's still a small resort. At one time it had 250 acres. Now it has probably 7 acres. On this property they had their own farm where they grew all their vegetables that would be served. And they had a dairy herd where they would make their milk and butter and all that other good dairy products. The granddaddy of all, the Kitty Hotel, sat above the Delaware. Didn't start out like this, started as a boarding house, and through successive owners, does everyone hear me?
Yes.
Enlarged, enlarged, enlarged. 4 presidents stayed here. It had the capacity of 500 people. Well, definitely, most of these hotels were destroyed by fire. They were fire traps. Also, they weren't built for winter weather. This was from Memorial Day to, if they extended the season, maybe the end of September, and that was it. And then they would, close the hotels, cover all the furniture in dust cloths, and that would be it. One of the recreational things for the guests would be these NAFON boats that would take people for a ride, and also a swimming beach we could see here. But most of the social activities, they didn't have a social director as you do on a cruise ship today, or if you go to a big resort. Was really the occupants or the vacationers would love to sit in rocking chairs on these front porches. Now this, I forget the square feet of how big their front porch was, but they would line up in these rocking chairs and just rock, because the people wanted to get out of New York City and northern New Jersey because of all the industry. Just like downtown Scranton at the time was filled with smog. It wasn't a nice place to be in the summer. They came to the mountains, Delaware Water Gap, as we see here, for fresh air. Clean water was another big thing. And an interesting thing in all their advertisement, a good table, meaning you had to provide good food or you wouldn't come back. Same today. I mentioned the Delaware Valley Railroad. Well, when you pull into Dansbury Depot today, that's on the right-hand side here. You can't see it. It's black and white postcard. It didn't come out that great. But Dansbury is still a reused building. It's now a restaurant named Dansbury Depot. This was the Delaware Valley Railroad. As you see, it's pulling in, and what it would do, it would back the 3 or 4 cars all the way back to Bushkill, and there were 5 or 6 stops on the way back there. Now it's Route 20, I think 29 today, or 206. No, Route 26. That was really the roadbed for the Delaware Valley Railroad. It was in existence around 40 years. Went out of business carrying passengers in 36, freight in 1948. This would be a typical downtown hotel in Strasburg. This was the America House. Had enough rooms for 75 people. A little later card, you see the buses that you can still go out to the Yellowstone and ride in those same buses today. They were called tourist buses. One of the older cards along the Delaware Valley Railroad, this card is from 1901 of the Echo Lake House. And the Echo Lake House had their own railroad stop because there were 4 or 5 other resorts at this particular spot. Very old photograph made into a postcard. I'm sorry I don't have what's written on the back, but I do remember from doing the research on this and just looking at the back. The woman that's writing to her friend Bessie says, "I'm the 3rd window from the left," so that was her room there. And she wanted to tell her friend where she was staying at the Echo Lake House. After 1906, that's when the law was changed, and I'll get into that little postcard lore as we go on.
Was there really like a lake there?
Yeah. There is now, it's a private, home community, not called Echo Lake. Indian Queen Hotel was located on Main Street in Strasburg. Very neat Victorian hotel. As you can see, the veranda, very long, because people, they socialize, want to get the fresh air in these hotels. Also, the second floor, they have or really the third floor, have a veranda up there. This hotel lasted to the 40s when they ripped it down. It didn't burn down. They ripped it down to put in a parking lot. You know those parking lots? Or it could have been a drugstore if it happened in 2007. And a bank. But a gracious hotel. In the book, I have interior shots of this. If you're familiar with East Strasburg, the Maplehurst is on the property now of the junior and senior high school. It started off as a small boarding house. If you went through underneath the sign there, that was the original, and then they just kept on adding buildings as they went down. Could house 250 people, and this property had their own farm. You know, it wasn't like we have today. You just call up a food purveyor and order what you need. You had to grow a lot of your stuff. Along the Delaware Valley Railroad, you have the Peters House in Bushkill, very famous hotel. At least one president we know stayed there, and was close to the different falls that were a great tourist attraction, just like it is today in Bushkill Falls, and also great fishing along the Delaware. Notice the porches. As we move up the line, we got off the train at Cresco. The Buck Hill bus waited for us. I mean, on a bus pulled by 4 horses, and we transferred up the hill to the inn at Buck Hill. First started by the Friends of Philadelphia, then it got into the Buck Hill Falls Company, then it went into private ownership, and in the food service business, I serviced this until they closed. They still owe us money. Owners left town and just it never reopened again. I did have the luck to go up to the auction that they had there. I got some neat memorabilia, you know, some plates and ashtrays and that, so I have that for my collection. But a great, great hotel. At one time it boasted a local art collection that was unsurpassed in the area, and part of the auction was selling those art pieces off, and they made a fortune there. As I said, this is empty today. It's a beautiful mission-style architecture built by Shipley architectural firm from Philadelphia, design. It started as a small place for the Quakers to come up and have some vacation time, and then it just, you know, grew overnight to this 450 room hotel that had all the amenities. I'm going to show you some as we get down. They came to see the falls. This was a big thing for our Victorian tourists. It was nice, cool, and refreshing around the falls. Part of the inn was an auditorium that could seat 900 people. Can you believe this? In a resort, they had very famous opera singers, bands come and play, you know, at the inn during its heyday. But it just blew my mind. And you know, when they built this at the turn of the century, they had the foresight to put in an auditorium where they could bring big name entertainment in and do shows. 1968, this was converted into a convention center, but by that time Las Vegas and other points west were getting the play, and you see the hotel demise in 1979. If you're in Mountain Home, if you're at the corner of 191 and Route 693, you'll see a sign that says Menominee Road. This sat right on the corner, the Ottawa Lodge. In my lifetime, it was known as the Ottawa Sports Camp, and and then it was called Skyline Sports Camp. Great Victorian Inn. This was not a postcard, this was a rack card from 1928, right before the Depression, or the stock market crash. And as you notice, it's a snow card. Back then, this particular hotel was probably one of very few that was insulated, and they could be open in the wintertime. Most of these, as I said, closed into September. But during their heyday, they also stayed open in the winter for sleighing. Tobogganing was a very big thing, ice skating. Skiing was just trying to catch on in northeastern Pennsylvania, and this beautiful inn succumbed to fire. The place where I stayed is Menominee, atop of Godfrey's Ridge in Mountain Home. Also in Mountain Home, you had the summer home of Samuel Kresge. S.S. Kresge's had one in Main Street here in Alton for many years. His summer home is still there. It's owned by the Forbes family from the Forbes 500 list. Beautiful dining room in the Menominee. It was all Pecky cypress, a very expensive wood, which is gorgeous. But again, notice the porch. This went the length of the building. Your recreation was on the porch. You wanted to breathe in that fresh air and see the beautiful scenery. To give you an example, Mount Spruce Manor was a boarding house. It was a regular house that took in boarders after, say, the children left. This only had enough room for 5 people. I'm trying to give an example of what boarding houses were. They weren't anything more than your house and my house. Had, you know, a few extra rooms and provided clean sheets and a good table for their guests. Not going to get any quotations on this, or I'm at the best thing on a computer. It's called a pine knob, not the pink knob. You see down the bottom, people point it out. It's wrong, but this is a good group. I like you're not pointing out my mistakes. Another hand-colored postcard. This was a larger boarding house in Canadensis, and it's still there. It's not a boarding house, it's a private home. Done in the, what I would call the American eclectic style. Very nice yard where people would, summer out there just sitting in chairs and that. Maybe play badminton or croquet. One of the bigger hotels started to be built in 1920. The Skytop Club. It was a club at one time for very wealthy Philadelphians. Today it's open to the general public. You couldn't make it as a club. It had its down years. Today they just spent over $20 million redoing it. It's just gorgeous. Have a few additions. 27-hole golf course. And as you see the trees around it on the photo, when they were putting up the hotel, they got the Olmsted firm, Frederick Law Olmsted, designed Central Park in New York. Well, they brought the son's company in to do the landscaping. But just a beautiful, beautiful old resort. Give me another shot. Big horseshoe veranda. And if you go up there today, what do they have on the porch? Chairs. I like to say that, when you went to one of these larger resorts, you either went for a week or the season, and compared to today's prices, and I think it's for a couple $500 a night to stay there, but it's 3 meals a day, and they're gourmet meals, and the only thing really you have to pay for is any liquor you drink. At that time, when this was built right before the Depression, well, 8 years before the Depression, or 9 years, a stay at the Skytop Club cost $24.95 a week per person. Now, if you go on the internet, and I think it's called measuringprices.com, you could put in 24.95 with the date of, like say 1920 or whatever, or 21, and then put in this year's date, 2007, and it would calculate what that is worth today.
Hey,
I haven't done that, but I'm not a computer guy. Spruce Mountain House in Canadensis, sat on top of a hill, typical farmhouse that was converted to a boarding house, but there again, notice the big veranda, the porch.
what is the length of the porch?
The length, well, that's how some people categorize the good resort, the length of their porch. Because all their social entertainment was done on the porch in these smaller places. And the Spruce Mountain House did have their own farm, so you had not only good fresh air, good water, but a good table. Maybe some of you remember this place. It was originally called the Devonshire Pines in Mount Pocono. We're moving up the railroad now. In later years, the Skyline Inn, it burnt in the 60s, so before it burnt, Mount Airy bought it, and they used to house their employees in the inn. It needed a lot of work. I met a gentleman that stayed there a couple seasons, but there again, there's the front porch, 4 stories, or 4 stories, but 3 stories would be for your guests, and the top floor would be for the help. Some questions I've had before, like in a hotel like this, like what's the ratio of help to guests? I said I would have no idea because things were so hands-on then, they're not like today. I couldn't calculate that, and I haven't been able to talk to anyone that was, at the turn of the century, of saying, like, how many people worked in the kitchen. Usually in a hotel desk, you'll have 3 or 4 people. Today, a 200-room hotel can be run by 1 person at the front desk. In the kitchen, it's another story. They might have had 20 people working in the kitchen because everything was done by hand. They had to make their own butter, their own whipped cream, so on and so forth. I couldn't answer that, but it's a good question. The Elvin, Mount Pocono, if you go down 9 and 11, or Route 6 and 11, going towards Strasburg, it was originally called the Elvin. Notice that the porch is only 2 stories, 3rd floor for the help, but what it turned into be, Strickland's. It went from a little lazy Victorian resort to, in 1940, Ed Strickland and his wife migrated from Brooklyn. He was a milkman. It was after the war. He had, some GI money, and they purchased the rundown Elvin and turned it into Strickland's Mountain Inn. Now, part of the inn was just destroyed in the last few months when they were putting in that access road to Mount Airy.
Oh, yeah.
I went up and took pictures of them bulldozing the last part of the building that was here. I did know Ed Strickland. He was a stickler on the food that he served. Up until last year, we used to call our best ground beef Strickland burger because of his specifications. When I knew the place, you'd walk in and it was the only place that I knew they had 2 grand pianos, one in the entranceway and one in the dining room. Just a spectacular place. I asked one of the guys that were demolishing this, and they said the pianos were in there, but see, they were closed up for so many years, they probably weren't worth anything to begin with. Okay, this is called the Mount Airy House. This is the original Mount Airy Lodge as we know it. It was a farmhouse converted to a boarding house. That would have been the road that went down up to the meadow side and back to Route 9, or 6 and 11. You see they had a tennis court. Not a good picture, but when you see this, you see the old part? That was part of that old house that we saw there. So what they did, they added on when the Martens family purchased it. and really I call it jazzed it up some. It went from a sleepy little boarding house to, you know, beautiful Mount Airy Lodge that they've spent $2 million a year in advertising it in the Metro New York market. Their philosophy, I did interview Dick Hawk, who was their personnel director up there for 40 years, and Dick told me that they didn't care. They only wanted you there once and take your money. They didn't care if you came back because there was enough people out there getting married that, you know, it would just be a wash. So.
Yeah, but they used to have shows up there and everything.
Yeah, King Henry and the show.
People, yeah.
Okay. Moving back up to Mount Pocono. Does anyone know which hotel this is? Okay, it was originally the Mount Pleasant House, built in 1887. As you see, 1, 2, 3 sets of porches on this baby. Over time it was, you know, converted, but it turned out to be the place where I worked, in the Yankee Doodle restaurant. It's now in the corner of where the Burger King is in Mount Pocono. Yep. Can anyone remember what it was called? Oh, they had a zoo out the back too.
Nobody wants to tell their age.
No one wants to tell their age. I worked there my last year in high school, if you remember what I said first. George Karras, that had the Hilton downtown, took this hotel over from George Clovis, who was the original owner of the Castle Restaurant. And during the war, this was used as an R&R place for wounded veterans. At one time, it was called Hyde's Sanitarium for tuberculosis patients. Since it was in Mount Pocono, it was at a high altitude, good cool air that they thought TV people should have. And they got that philosophy from a Dr. Thoreau in Saranac Lake. Saranac Lake is the big TV place, but maybe you remember also, you know, we had the West Side Sanitarium and the East Side Sanitarium in Scranton. Well, they were both owned by Lackawanna County for TV. And this, for a few years, was you know, a sanitarium, Hyde Sanitarium they called it. And in 1968, this hotel burned down, but it was remodeled many times. It didn't look like this, didn't have the 3 sets of porches. Today, the Burger King sits there in Citizen Savings. And it was just a neat Victorian hotel.
Yeah, we have an idea of all this food.
This postcard is dated 1901.
Oh.
So it was right at the turn of the century. And I like to say that the Poconos developed from 1874, after the Civil War, up into, you know, the crash. They went down, then as we get closer to 38, 39, and then 40 of the war, it was still there, but right after the war, that's when the Poconos came back up, and they reinvented themselves as another destination for all these GIs coming home from the war, as a place to do your honeymoon. And that's how the honeymoon capital of the world.
Alan, didn't they call that veranda, or they just call them porches?
Veranda, yeah. Maybe call it veranda. Rose Mountain Inn in Scott Run, typical boarding house, 35 people. Was noted for the superb water here. Today it's ripped down and there's no trace of Rhodes Mountain Inn, but they were very also famous for another postcard in the book. The other side of the Mountain Inn was the rhododendrons that they had up there. Gives you an example of the second station at Pocono Summit. D&W first one burnt down, so they decided we're going to put up a concrete. This is a concrete station. It's still there today. Roof is a little saggy in that, but it looks just like this without the shrubbery in that. It doesn't have the two sets of rails. They're long gone, you know, from 1970. But for the railroad buffs out there, another railroad station. They told you you'd get off at Pocono Summit here and go to the Pocono Inn, as it was known first. This is Pocono Manor. This is from the backside of it, looking from Lake Massaquan up to the hotel. Originally built by the Society of Friends from Philadelphia as a summer retreat, and then has changed hands many times. The last family ownership were the people that owned a very large coffee company in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Ireland Coffee, you ever hear of Ireland Coffee? It's more a hotel blend coffee. They just went out of business. Well, they didn't go out of business. They were absorbed by Chock-full of Nuts, and then Chock-full of Nuts was absorbed by Sara Lee. But beautiful resort, still nice today. I'm going to give you another shot of that. That's if you even pull in there. You had 1946. They put on the tower, 6th floor. They added a big dining room. That's the tower to the left, but built in the Queen Anne style, all shingle. It looks just like that today, with the exception of it's a cream color trimmed in white.
Oh, yeah.
From Pocono Summit, you can go down, was at 940, past Pocono Pines, and we'll go to Pocono Pines. This is Pocono Lake. Pocono Lake, a man-made lake for the Pocono Ice Company. And this hotel was also served year-round, because in the winter, this is where the ice harvesters stayed to farm the ice out of the man-made lakes that border Route 940. I mentioned, the Lutherans. Well, the Lutherans came to the Poconos, purchased 6,500 acres and put this resort. This was called the Pocono Pines Inn, one of the hotels on the property. There were 3. At one time, you might remember reading or hearing about the Chautauqua type meetings they would have. It started in Chautauqua, New York. They were religious meetings where they got people together and pound, fire and brimstone in them. This is what the Lutherans thought they would do up here. It lasted for around 30 years, and then the movement started to die out, and what happened, the hotel complex, the 3 buildings went into disrepair. Someone tried to take them over, and it was just so far gone. In 57, they came in and just ripped down all the hotels on the property. I think I have another shot.
Al, what is
another
that?
building.
What was that piece of the structure on the far left?
That was a part of a water tower. I don't know if they were building it at the time or it fell down. Because this is a postcard, though, a photograph. So it was probably made by a local photographer and sold them at the inn. Now the next shot is an old German postcard, hand-colored. This was Assembly Lodge. You had the inn in the middle, you had Assembly Lodge on this side, and you had Assembly Lodge 2 on the left-hand side. The first card we saw first was built first. This was built second, and then the third one. They also had a man-made lake here for swimming in that, but it was mostly religious meetings that they would have. If we move up the line, we're in Tobyhanna. If you're at the Tobyhanna station now, you walked out to the road, and I forget what it's called, Church Street. You walked up to Church Street and looked to your right, you would have looked up to the Tobyhanna house. Today, it's an empty lot. The hotel burned in 1961. Just one of the grand old hotels of Tobyhanna, called the Tobyhanna House. You notice the white pole there on the right-hand side, pitching pole. On the left-hand side would be the Roman Catholic Church there today. Can't see it, but it was not constructed at the time. 2 weeks ago, I got a call to
go to, maybe some people remember Little Flower Camp, was run by the diocese. Well, this is right next to Little Flower Camp. It's no longer Little Flower Camp, it's some big long Russian name, that they bring children from Little Russia by Coney Island in New York to the old campsite, and they come for either 1 or 2 weeks, and they have these kids, inner city kids of Russian origin, have a chance to play in the good, clean air in that. This, the Chichester House, sits right next to the property. I was up there, as I said, 2 weeks ago, doing a closeout up there, and surprisingly, the Chichester House is still there. It's in disrepair, but it's still there. Typical boarding house, nice long porch that would look out. Now, when you're there today, you sat on that porch, you couldn't see the lake because of the trees in front of it. But at the time that this postcard was taken, just look to your left. Everything was cut down. It was clear cut. From sitting on that porch, you would look at Mill Pond number 3. Mill Pond number 3 today is a nice lake, but it was a man-made lake made for the ice industry. Toby Hanna was famous for their human consumption ice. Gouldsboro was freezer ice or refrigeration ice. It had impurities. Because Toby Hanna sets up higher on the plateau than Gouldsboro, so you didn't have impurities in the Toby Hanna ice as you did in the Gouldsboro. So, how many people here remember ice boxes?
Yeah.
I saw one in a cellar once. But that would be the ice that would be put in the top of your refrigerator. Human consumption ice, or if you, say, rode on the old Phoebe Snow, the ice from Mill Pond number 3 would be the ice that would be at the end of each car in those water spigots.
You say you're gonna cut nice on the lake?
They do every year. Steamtown runs a train up to Toby Hanna. You get off, you get on a bus, they take you down to Mill Pond number 3. And, yeah, they advertise in the paper. The ice has to be 13 inches thick. Because what they do, they bring horses out and everything to clear the snow. Yeah, they do it periodically, so you see it in the paper, you want to go.
I saw them once when I was a little boy at Hart Lake. Everybody know where Hart Lake is?
The DL&W Railroad, to entice more people to ride the trains to the Poconos, came up with this great advertising program in the late 1890s about Phoebe Snow, a fictitious person that wore white, because if you rode the road of anthracite, you didn't get dirty. The DL&W burned anthracite coal that is really cinder-free. Every other railroad burnt bituminous coal that's very dirty, and you get cinders. So their big advertising thing, you have to remember there was no air conditioning back then in the 80s, or 1880s, 1890s, you know, up until, you know, after the war, that all the windows would be open. So a woman or a man who had anything light on, and if you rode on a train with bituminous coal, you'd be filthy by the time you got there. They came up with this ingenious plan to promote Phoebe Snow, a gracious lady in white, to promote the road of anthracite, the Lackawanna Railroad, or the DL&W. And this started, as I said, in the 1901. It lasted for 25 years. And then we see it resurface in 1948 when they resurrect Phoebe Snow for the diesels that were coming to age. That was the Phoebe Snow Limited, that you could go, I think it stopped 4 different places, so it was like an express train from Hoboken to Scranton, from Scranton to Buffalo. A very popular
That's in the
train.
50s or something, isn't it?
The rack cards that they use for advertisement. Phoebe says, and Phoebe knows, that smoke and cinders spoil good clothes. Is this a pleasure and a delight to take the road of anthracite? And there were 75 of these different little jingos made up, and they were ads. They might not be as colorful as this in a newspaper, but if you ever go on a trolley ride, that, you know, those those cards they would have up in the ceiling. This is where they would advertise the Lackawanna Railroad, because they wanted people from, you know, the Manhattans and the Philadelphias to ride the road of anthracite and come to the Pocono Mountains.
Oh, what did they burn in Steamtown? Is that bituminous?
Bituminous.
Yeah, because I noticed that some of this ashes coming in.
And that's the end, the greetings for the Pocono Mountains. My book is 300 pages long, tons of photographs. I just thought I'd give you a little background of what the early development of resorts in the Poconos were like. I'd be glad to answer any questions at this time. I know the answer, but I have Dale and Bob back there. They